Welcome to this episode of Let's Talk Forensic Psychology. We're really lucky to be joined today by Professor Kieran McCartan, who's a Professor of Criminology at the University of Western England, but he's actually a forensic psychologist. He's been the programme lead there, having been a lecturer since 2007. He's joined as a lecturer. He's the leader of the Social Science Research Group and spoke extensively at conferences and published loads of papers and books on many topics, but particularly in relation to the origins and causes of sexual offending. Kieran is very active and the lead blogger of the ATSA blog, deputy chair of NOTA and a member of the Board of Risk Management Authority in Scotland. Kieran also advised the Council of Europe and the European Commission. He's been a visiting scholar at the University of Minnesota, San Jose State University and Griffith University, and a visiting research fellow at the University of Huddersfield, and visiting professor at Queensland University in Brisbane. So he's very busy. He's really active in promoting circles of support and accountability, and is currently the chair of the Board of Trustees of Circle Southwest. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
We'll be here a while listening to how you get into these jobs.
Thank you both for having me.
So I wonder if you could start by telling us about your pathway into your sort of role as a forensic psychologist and a criminologist.
So my background was, I started psychology at A level. In school, I had this sort of delusion that I sort of wanted to be a journalist. I remember in the days of work experience, I remember going for a week's work experience with RTE News and being very disillusioned with what the life of a journalist actually was, because actually a lot of it's sitting around waiting for a story to happen. And that's, not very appealing, especially when you're 17 years old and looking for a career. My school offered A-level psychology. So this would have been back in 96, 97, I did my A-levels. So I just thought, oh, this is quite interesting. I didn't really know that much about it. Around about that time, you had things like Cracker on TV, and I was like, oh, this could be quite good. This could be interesting. And I remember coming home to my parents and saying, hey, I want to be a psychologist. And my dad giving me a look of, you're sure you wouldn't rather do a degree in business? I'm like, no, it'll be fine. Don't worry about it. So yeah, so I then did my A-level and went to Queen's in Belfast to study my undergraduate degree in psychology. And during my time there, I was very fortunate to be taught by a very inspirational professor who's now no longer with us, Professor Noel Sheehy, taught me. And I remember he just sort of opened forensic psychology up to me in a way that had never really been explained to me before, and it really sort of attracted my attention. And I remember applying for many courses after that, and I ended up applying for some clinical positions and forensic positions because you can get into working with people who have offended in psychology in a number of different ways. So I was trying to think, well, what's the best tactic? The biggest driving force was I wanted to leave home. So I was 21 and I was like, I have to get out of Northern Ireland. So I'm like, let's look for universities in England and Scotland. Let's see what's going on. And in the end, I decided to do this very random degree, which was in clinical criminology at the University of Leicester. And there, I was very fortunate to have been taught by Herschel Prince, who was my dissertation supervisor. I did my master's dissertation on public and professional attitudes towards paedophilia, and Herschel was my supervisor. And I've been really lucky in my career to have some really influential people sort of fall into roles in my life. And then after that, went on to do my PhD. So technically my PhD is in psychology, but I had joint supervisors. I had one who was a social psychologist, a guy called John Maltby from University of Leicester, and the other one was a criminologist, a lady called Charlotte Bilby. And so I sort of, my PhD straddled both areas of that. And again, looking at understandings of paedophilia and definitions of it. And then I got my first job at UWA in criminology, and sort of never really looked back. And like over the years, I've studied and engaged in many things, but the vast majority of them have been around sort of risk risk management, community uh, community integration, as well as things now like trauma informed practice and public health approaches. And I've been really lucky to have had some really supportive people. So, like when I got my PhD, one of the first grants that I got was looking at the sex offenders register in the UK, and that got me working with one of my lifelong collaborators, who was Hazel Kemshaw, and she was more of a mentor to me than anyone else has been in the years. So, uh, you know, from starting off with A-level psychology to ending up in criminology, it's been an interesting path that I certainly not one that has sort of went the direction that if you had have told 18-year-old me this is what you'd be doing, I would have necessarily believed you.
I mean, there's so much there, and there's lots to unpick and think about. And specifically, maybe we could come to thinking about the difference between forensic psychology and criminology. But I also feel like it's really important to say that we've had some big people on here, and we're grateful for everyone coming. The amount of people that mention Cracker, I just feel like we just have to give Cracker a shout out.
Oh, I love Quacker. Yeah, he's a great
But
program. Loads of people joined for Quacker.
literally, Robbie Coltrane has done more for the evolution of psychology than probably a lot of academics in the field. Let's put it that way.
Well, for misconceptions of what a forensic
Yeah.
psychologist does, drinking whiskey in the office and going to crime scenes of all sorts.
Can we think then about your move from forensic psychology into criminology, and perhaps thinking about what the difference might be? It is, I guess, a common question that we get asked.
Well, to me, criminology's a broader palette. It's it's yes, it's not as practice based and it's potentially more theoretical than forensic psychology is, but it encompasses a whole range of different areas of criminal justice and opens up possibilities not only for working in something like HMPPS or in the police, but also in the third sector and doing a lot of community engaged related work. Because I think the appeal of forensic psychology is everyone wants to think, oh, I can sit down opposite someone who's done something horrendously horrific and sort of get to the bottom of what it is that they've done. And, maybe you can do that, but it's not necessarily for everyone. And I think sort of the move to criminology to me opened up the boundaries of what I could look at and what I was interested in. And, I think back in the day when I was doing my psychology degree, I had this idea that I would make a really good therapist, that I would be able to get under the psychological mechanisms of people and really understand them. But the older I get, the more I probably would question that. I would say the more reflective I get, the more I'm going, well, actually, would I have been that good at that element? Because there's a skill set to it. So I do work with lots and lots of different people, like a couple of my really good friends are people like David Prescott and Robin Wilson, and they've got a real aptitude for that. They've got that therapeutic insight that I don't think that I now realize that I don't think I ever really had. I like the idea of it, but I'm not sure if I could sit and talk with individuals. And even now, well, when I go into prison or I talk to people who are on probation, you know, I have got some of those skills, but not to the degree that I think I would need to be able to do the job in an effective way. And I think the other thing about me, is that although I am quite trauma informed and know quite a lot about what's going on, I know that I internalize things quite a lot. So I don't think I could go home and hanging on a clothes peg at 5 o'clock and sit down and eat dinner with the kids and not think about it until I went in at 9 o'clock the next morning. Because I even find with my current job in academia, there'll be weeks where I'll work 7 days a week, or I'll work into the evening, or I'll get up at 5 in the morning and work. I'm quite work driven. So I don't think I could have switched that part of my brain off that would have sort of brought these thoughts and these conversations back into the equation. So I think there's something about criminology that allows you to do the work that it allows you to engage with the population and the topic, but doesn't put you at that cold face. But that also gives you a bit of a critical edge and a bit of a point of reflection about whether some of the practice works. And I think I find my niche in research, and I enjoy being critical, not in the sense of being negative, because everyone thinks being critical means being negative, but being questioning. And I think that sort of the move to criminology has enabled me to do that more effectively than I would have been able to do sitting in a room talking with the men who I would have been talking with.
Yeah, I sometimes think of criminology as a sort of a critical friend to forensic psychology. They look wider and bigger than we would necessarily look sometimes. But yeah, I think there's lots of overlap, isn't there?
Oh yeah, like so. For instance, I used to run a forensic psychology module at the university and a risk management module, and like we talk about the same things that are in the criminology degree. The psychology degree and the criminology degree overlap with each other quite significantly, much more than say a law degree or a sociology degree would. So there's those common points um, around it, and actually what criminology teaches us is about the study of crime. And if you go back to sort of HMPPS 101, they talk about the biopsychosocial model, and that's what Crim does, but it just does it in a non-therapeutic way. It talks about it in quite a critical evidence-based way, with aspects of sociology, aspects of health, aspects of law thrown in for good mix. And I think that's the difference. No matter where you go in the country, if you do a forensic psychology degree, you'll be in the psychology department. But if you do a criminology degree, so at UWA, our criminology degree is based in social science. If you go down to Bristol, their criminology degree is in social policy. If you go to Portsmouth, it's in psychology. And so criminology sort of was always called a rendezvous subject, or as some other colleges would call it, a cuckoo bird subject. And it sort of invites you to take different perspectives, but that really depends upon the school that you go to. But forensic psychology looks very similar, regardless of whether you go to Cardiff Met or whether you go to Nottingham Trent or whether you go to Birmingham.
Yeah, that's true. And could you tell us a bit about your Horizon 2020 grant? I mean, that's one of you've got many superpowers, I think. One of yours is talking, you're a great raconteur, you're a great speaker. I've seen you speak lots of times, and you're a great speaker. One of your great skills is getting grants. So could you tell us about that, what that sort of grant entails?
So the Horizon 2020 grant is for a European project called Prevent to Protect. And it's about secondary prevention with men at risk of committing child sexual abuse. And the prevention of child sexual abuse is one of the European Union and the United Nations key performance indicators over the next 10 years. So there's a number of grants going on at the minute within Europe that looks at how European countries can come together to help us understand how to prevent child sexual abuse from happening. So the grant that I'm involved in is around building a website and a resource for people who are at risk of committing child sexual abuse. So that secondary prevention group who want to seek help, and it sort of outlines some of the help that's available to them, where they might be able to get it, what it looks like in their country of origin, and what's online, what's in person. So my role in that is I lead the professional network around it. So not only upskilling professionals, but disseminating knowledge and creating an evidence base and network that really helps us understand why secondary prevention is important, and why, although it may seem counterintuitive sometimes, actually prevention is better than a cure. And so that grant's ongoing at the minute. We're probably about halfway through it, and I'm involved in that with a number of different agencies and organizations, including our good friend Nicholas Blagden, and as well as colleagues from across Europe and broader.
That's really interesting. And I meant to ask you a couple of times, you talk about UWE, so that's the University of West of England.
Yeah.
Yeah, just so people know where you're based. With your accent, they wouldn't be expecting you to be in Bristol.
No, very true, very true. You can take the person out
Way
of
out of
Northern Ireland,
Ireland.
but you can't take the Northern Irish out of the person.
So you're at the moment in one of your jobs creating a book about epicrim, as you call it. So I wonder if you could tell us a bit about that. This is about working with people with sexual convictions and why that might be important, or what epicrim is.
So epicrim is a very shortened version of epidemiological criminology. And since COVID, we're all epidemiologists and we all really understand what that means. So, but basically what it means is it looks at criminology from a public health perspective. And it says that really we need to be understanding how we prevent first-time offending, as well as how we respond to and prevent future offending or reoffending. And it's very much rooted in the works of like Smallbone and Wortley that from the 90s, and that prevention of child sexual abuse, and a lot of the prevention stuff that has come about over the past 20 years through not only academics but the work of organizations like Bernardo's and the NSPCC and Lucy Faithfull Foundation as well. And so what it says is that to prevent, to understand child sexual abuse and look at it from a public health perspective, we need to look at it across 4 domains. So the first is primary prevention. So those big, broad social messages that are out there. How do we understand child sexual abuse? What does that mean? So things like, for instance, we may love them or hate them, but things like soap operas. So for any non-avid Hollyoaks fans out there, Hollyoaks is running a storyline at the minute on sibling sexual abuse. And historically, EastEnders has run storylines on child sexual abuse, child abuse, and rape. So those big social media messages, so things like relationship and sex education in schools and how they tie together, that's primary prevention. And we do quite a lot of that around different aspects. The second is secondary prevention. And so I mentioned the 2PS project as an example of that. That's how do you work with people who are on the cusp, people who are at risk of committing child sexual abuse, and how do you stop them? So how do you reach out to them? How do you help them get help? And how do you help them not offend? And this is one area that we haven't traditionally done a lot of work around. And it's a growing area, especially over the past 10 to 15 years. And there's more and more investment going on, not only at the European level, but also conversations at a UK level, as well as across the 4 nations of the UK. Tertiary prevention, which we all know so well, is things like treatment programs for people who have committed sexual offences. They're the most stable form of intervention. The two of you have ran more versions of this than I've had probably hot meals. And it's what the evidence base is. If we look at the sexual abuse literature, the vast majority of it is tertiary prevention. Do risk assessments work? Do treatment programs work? Does community integration work? And I say community integration, and this is something I really want to press home, because I don't believe in reintegration, because means a return to. And reintegration is returning someone to a point of what they're at before they were caught, arrested, convicted, put on a program. Tertiary prevention should be about integrating people pro-socially for quite often the first time and getting them to think about their triggers and their offending behavior in a different way. And then the last one is quaternary prevention, which is harm reduction. So in medical terms, that is, say, like you take someone like me, for instance. So I'm diabetic, I'm on a whole range of tablets for my diabetes, and I'll go to my GP for a review, and they'll say, these tablets interact with each other. So we're going to change your medication just so that they don't interact and there's no negative side effects. It's that do no harm principle. So how do you integrate people post prison, post probation, back into the community in a supportive environmental way? So basically what epicrim tells us is that ultimately crime and offending behaviour, which also includes sexual offending, is as much of a health and a well-being issue as it is a criminal justice issue. And that's really important because we have looked at it for too long in many countries, including our own, as a reactive problem. So if someone is sexually abused, we react to the problem. But the more that we know about the population who commit sexual abuse and child sexual abuse, the more that we can be preventative and proactive. And that's what EpiCrim teaches us. So if we're proactive about things like influenza, cancer treatments, why can't we be proactive about child sexual abuse? Why can't we be proactive in the way that we educate kids in school, that we educate communities? And there's some really good examples going on at the minute. A really good one that I want to give a plug to is Together for Childhood in Plymouth, which is run in conjunction with the NSPCC, where they're taking a whole city approach to the prevention of child sexual abuse. And so EpiCrim sort of tells us we need a different outlook, a different perspective, because one of the issues is, as you both well know, working in the prison establishment, prison numbers aren't going down, sexual violence numbers are increasing, and the challenge is, how do we stop them before they get to the point where they commit sexual offending? And one of the charities I work for put it expertly when so Circle Southwest talk about no more victims, and that's really what EpiCrim's about, preventing the sexual abuse before it happens.
You said that not enough work's been done yet, which is positive that it is, but at that secondary stage, and thinking about how everything's kind of gone into the tertiary and the sort of intervention once people are in custody. Do you think there's a reason why we haven't been in the secondary stage as much? Is there some sort of barrier as a society?
I think there's a couple of things there, Emily. Definitely, I think one of the biggest things is it's a hard political sell. All prevention is a hard political sell. So why should governments invest money in things if we don't know they're going to stop this thing from happening? And that's a challenge. Not only about sexual abuse, but in general, that's a challenge. But then when you think about the topic, and you think about actually the prevention of sexual abuse and investing money into people who may commit sexual abuse, well, that's a difficult public conversation to have, one that people aren't always open to and aren't always willing to have. And I think politicians quite often recognize there's an issue and recognize something needs to be done, but they need an evidence base and they need support and cover to be able to do that. But because a lot of the secondary prevention work is quite small scale, quite localized, not necessarily evaluated with the same rigor that you would find in tertiary relapse prevention work, the evidence base isn't necessarily strong. So what you see is small pilots that, show promising results, and then suddenly commissioning changes or political direction changes, and there's not the money there for them anymore. So I think one of the issues really around secondary prevention is, how do we get past our feelings and our attitude towards people who commit child sexual abuse to say, if we invest money and resource into this, we can stop them from committing crimes in the first place, so children don't have to be harmed, so that children aren't walking away with adverse childhood experiences or trauma that create conversations in later life. So one of the things that I always think about when I'm having this conversation with people is, we know that adverse childhood experiences and trauma play a more significant role in the lives of people who end up in the criminal justice system. And I'm not getting into the whole 4 ACEs or more debate, but if you look across the establishment, there is more ACEs and trauma in there than not. And one of the challenges is, at some point something happened to these people that had this impact upon them. If we were able to give the right victim support, if we were able to stop that thing from happening, then they may not have went on to hurt other people. So it's a very politically sensitive somewhat controversial issue. But I think if we're serious about preventing child sexual abuse, we have to be as open to the conversation around sort of working with at-risk populations in this way as we are to working with at-risk populations in the field of drugs, in the field of terrorism, in the field of antisociality and behavior. We do it in other fields of forensic psychology, but we don't do it in this field. And I think that's very telling.
I wonder also about how it feels for the person seeking help, like how much easier it is to say, I've done something, I feel guilty and now I need help, as opposed to I'm thinking about doing something that I feel a bit guilty about and now I need help. Like how we target or offer the help to people that haven't yet done something.
And, you know, the problem is that, like, even if you're thinking about people going on to commit contact offences, or even people downloading and viewing child sexual abuse material, you know, you want them to have conversations in those early stages with the right people rather than the wrong people who might reinforce their cognitive distortions, who might reinforce their values, who might say, actually, it's all right to look at an image. Don't worry about it, because, you know, there's hundreds of them out there. And we all know that people look at them. And what we will need to be doing is saying to people, in the same way that we say, are you concerned about your alcohol consumption? Are you concerned about your health and your weight? So we need to approach it in a pro-social way that says, we're here to help you. And a really good example of that is something like the Sex Offenders Register in New Zealand. So the register in New Zealand is run by a forensic psychologist, fascinating lady called Marianne Laws. She's Scottish originally. And the way that they've positioned the register is they've steeped it in the Good Lives model, and they've said it's a pro-social tool. So the register is there to be there for you if you think you're going to relapse and reoffend. The role of the register is not to keep an eye on you and not to make sure that you don't reoffend. It's there to be a supportive tool. And then you look at, for instance, our register, which isn't orchestrated or ran in that way. You start at some interesting, doing some initial evaluations of the New Zealand model, and you know, maybe Margaret Ann's one for your show at a later date. But you know, what does running a register as a forensic psychologist look like, and what does that bring to what is traditionally a policing matter?
Do you think it's to do with the attitudes of the people in New Zealand? Is that different, do you think, culturally?
Yeah, I think there is something about New Zealand that's different, and this is one of, you know, doing a lot of the international work that I've ended up doing. You know, context is so important. Like we've just finished a project in the global south with ECPAC International, looking at registers. So actually, a lot of Asian countries, so Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, think they want sex offender registers, but actually that's not what they want. They don't want to keep tabs on their own citizens. They want to know about foreign citizens coming to their countries to have sex with children. And what's really interesting about that is through the work, what we've discovered is thinking about it as foreign nationals coming in has changed the context of the way child sexual abuse is sometimes viewed in these local communities, where they don't view child sexual abuse as a local community issue, and it doesn't happen in their communities. It's foreign people coming to their country to do this. So it's changed the nature of the conversation. So context is really important in all of this. What works in the UK won't necessarily work in other countries. So if you take something like one of the most famous examples from Germany, Project Protection Prevention Dunkelfeld, wouldn't necessarily work anywhere other than Germany because of the way Germany think about sex, the way that they think about psychology, the way their criminal justice system is run, the way their disclosure laws work, all of which is contradictory to somewhere like the UK, which is a very different system and a very different model. So you can look for good examples in other countries, but then you've always got to adapt them to the context of the country in which you're in.
So why do you think that's become a thing that people, as they would be called, sex tourists, going over to commit those offences in another country? Why would people think to go to that country to do it than to go to any other country?
It happens in a number of countries, but historically in the global south, there hasn't been the same degree of law enforcement. There hasn't been the same approach. There's also a lot of the global south is second world and third world countries where actually global north money goes a lot further than global south money does. And there's a sort of a desperation there as well, which a lot of these individuals can pick up on and use. But what we're even seeing now, even with the advent of technology, it's not even about traveling to countries like this. You can live stream child sexual abuse in situ through the black market and through credit card transfers and stuff like that. So, well, one of the challenges is we tend to think about child sexual abuse and this is where the reactive approach falls down. By the time you get it to the place, and by the time it gets to you guys in prison, you've got a bad person who's done a bad thing to a vulnerable victim. So you know the two people in question, you know what's going on, and you're there to repair and build and restore if you can. The consequences of this. But child sexual abuse and sexual abuse in general affects about 1 in 4 people globally. And what we need to be thinking about is that anyone could potentially perpetrate, anyone could potentially be a victim. And because we're not doing that, we're looking at the people that we know about and then trying to find other people similar to them. We're not necessarily doing anyone a favor. And we know the causes of sexual offending are wide and varied. And we know that they're quite distinctive to the individual. So the more that we can upskill people and the more that people can understand the realities of child sexual abuse and how to prevent it, the more that we can stop victimization from happening and the more that we can actually help communities understand there's something that they can do around it. And I think to me, it always strikes me as, when we talk about the sort of public health approach, the one thing that always strikes me is you see things, it used to be 1 in 3 people, now it's 1 in 2 people are affected by cancer at some point in their lives. And you see Stand Up to Cancer on Channel 4 and we do all of this. But similar enough, people are impacted by child sexual abuse and sexual abuse across their lifestyle. But we don't see conversations about that on national. We don't have a national debate about sexual violence and how to prevent it. We don't see money being poured into sexual violence services, even victim services, after the fact are not particularly well funded. So I think, people who want to sexually offend will often find a way to do it. We have to give the communities and the public the right tools to stop them from having those opportunities.
And you touched briefly on some of the difficulties people would have coming back into society, having been in hospital or custody. What do you think those main challenges are?
I think the biggest challenge is the stigma around the offence that they've committed. There's a huge social stigma around it. I also think there's something about, if you go back to things like the Good Lives model, if you go back to like the work of Shab Maruna and Beth Weaver and talking about persistence, about meaningful and gainful existence, that actually a lot of these people, because of the offences they've committed, can't go back into the jobs and careers that they were in beforehand. So they quite often have to retrain or can't retrain or have to do something completely different. And that sort of begs the question of what is the meaningful aspect of what they give back into society and how do they do that? And there's also ideas about risk. We know that risk changes and risk is dynamic. And we know that, if you look at the research on tertiary prevention and risk assessment, if you are pro-socially return to the community, your risk level drops. You can go from being very high to low over 20 years. We know that good community support really helps with that. Living an active and engaged lifestyle really helps with that. But quite often, the offences that these men, and I say men because it is in the main men that we're talking about here, especially the pass through HMPPS, have committed, will often be a barrier or will shut down some of those pro-social aspects that will help with their assistance, and that is a real challenge. So how do you pro-socially reintegrate if you can't find meaning in the life of the work that you have? And now some people will say, well, they've committed an offence. They don't deserve to have a meaningful integration back into society. But the one thing I will point out to people is you look how much prison costs per year. Indefinite incarceration is not a simple solution. We've got a prison crisis in England and Wales at the minute, the same in Scotland. And we just simply can't build more prisons to put people into. And the reality of the matter is, we don't want people to come out of prison and be on benefits the rest of their lives. We want them to contribute back in society. So I think that's one of the main challenges, how you navigate the stigma that these offences bring with them.
Mm. No, it's true. That's something that, and when we talk about preventing child sexual abuse, and I know this is not a popular opinion, but you know, we've worked with a lot of people who have perpetrated that, and you know, they feel they can't live with the guilt and the shame and the remorse they feel for doing that, you know, which is the thing. You know, as you say, some people say, well, they deserve that, but if they're going to live the rest of their lives and have a meaningful life, there needs to be a way that they can get past that. So definitely, it's two victims. Is you know, we recognise the victim who's the innocent party that's had it done to them, but the person who's perpetrated also has, everyone I've ever talked to, massive, strong feelings of regret and remorse and guilt about it.
Like one of the interesting things that I would say, for some of your listeners, if they haven't heard about it already, is there was an interesting project done by an organisation called Thriving Survivors and David Russell up in Scotland, where they looked at restorative justice in sexual offence cases, and they talked with victims of sexual violence about whether they would want to be offered the opportunity of restorative justice. And a lot of them were open to the idea of it, but certainly in England and Wales, restorative justice in sexual offence cases is a bit like the polygraph. It's the third rail of the sexual offence debates, where you know the conversation gets closed down quite quickly. And I'm not advocating restorative justice in every single context. I come from a culture where restorative justice was seen as the solution to every single problem. Growing up in Northern Ireland, whatever your problem is, restorative justice can fix it. But that's not always the case. But for victims of sexual abuse, and when we consider the fact that the vast majority of people know the person who is sexually offended against them, many of whom it's a family member or a close family friend, because that person goes to prison doesn't mean that person vanishes out of their lives forever. So, you know, from a victim's point of view, why wouldn't you offer them something that, if managed correctly and in the right way, could help them recover, but could also potentially help in the rehabilitation of the person who has harmed them? Why wouldn't you at least be open to that conversation? And I know that's a controversial topic, but I think it's certainly a topic that, you know, we do it in other aspects of criminal justice. We do it in murder cases.
Other cases, yeah. Yeah, so
So
it's really always been a no-no, hasn't it? But I can't
yeah,
see if the victim wants it, why you would be deprived of it in that way. Yeah, definitely. And could you tell us a bit more about your work with the Circles of Support and Accountability?
yeah. So I've been involved. I've been involved with circles for what must be nearly 15 years now. So I first heard about circles when I went a conference in the US, the Association for the Treatment of Sexual Abuse conference, and I saw Robin Wilson speak about circles. This must have been 2010, maybe 2009, 2010. And I was really inspired by what I heard. So a circle is you have a core member who is someone who has committed a sexual offense. And in returning to the community, they put a circle of approximately 5 members of the community around them who are trained to help and offer support to them and help them integrate back into society, usually over the course of a year. And then in the UK, when Circles was brought over, it was brought over by the Quakers and HMPPS and aspects of Loosely Faithful, and the government at the time weren't overly happy with it being completely run by members of the community. How it is in Canada, it's a slightly different model. So they encouraged a coordinator to be put, who's a paid member of staff, who then reports back to the statutory agencies and organisations. And the idea is that there's been many debates over the years of whether Circles is probation light or anything like that. Circles runs in conjunction with probation. It's there to do a lot of the assist and befriend stuff that probation officers just don't have the time to do now with the caseloads that they have. So Circles has been running here for about 25 years. As I said, I got involved in the early 2010s. Myself and Hazel Camshaw did the first government office. It was actually a Ministry of Justice funded evaluation of Thames Valley circles of support and accountability, and the Lucy Faithful version. I then later went on and did a Cabinet Office evaluation um, of circles of support and accountability, and I've done much research on it over the years. And then about 6 years ago, got involved with Circle Southwest, which is sort of runs from Gloucester down the country and across to about Reading. And I was on their board of trustees for a while, and then about 2 years ago, I became chair of the board of trustees. So I think Circles does a lot of invaluable work. It helps offer support and accountability to people who have committed offences. It allows an upskilling and educating of communities around the realities of sexual violence and child sexual abuse. And it also does a lot to reduce the stigma around it and actually show that people are willing to offer that supporting, helpful hand. And Circles now runs all over the country, all over the globe. So we've got Circles across Europe. We've got Circles in the Netherlands, in Belgium, in Catalonia, in Latvia. We've got Circles in Australia. So I led with my colleagues, Jodie Death and Kelly Richards, an evaluation of Circles in Australia for ANROS, which is one of the leading women's rights organisations out there. So Circles has become a bit of a global phenomenon. But the one important message I would say that Circles brings home is it reinforces that public health approach. It sees sexual abuse as a community issue. People who commit sexual abuse come from communities and they go back into communities. So communities have to be part of the solution as well as the prevention of sexual abuse.
And what I really like about circles is that there's such a variety of people. So for each circle, they might have a person who's retired, they might have a student, they might have someone in between. You know, there's such a range of people usually in each circle that for the person coming out of prison to have almost like a new group of social network for them is really important, you know, and they're going to do different things. They go bowling or they go for coffee or they might go to cinema, do all different things that they would do with a group of friends you've got. But it's a really good opportunity to get to know people of different ages as well, because that's not something people often, if they come out of prison, they've been used to mixing with a certain group of people, maybe a certain age group of people, and not had that chance to just talk about something completely different or talk about things that they don't necessarily, you know, just have a conversation about something totally different because that's what that person might be interested in. You know, it's really, really diverse, isn't it?
And I think the benefit of all of that is it gives them an opportunity to role model pro-social positive behavior in
Yeah.
a context. Like, as both of you know, working in a prison setting, it's very easy not to sexually offend against a child in prison. And prison's a very staged environment. But once you come out, you know, those first 100, 150 days are the real crisis points where people are more likely to relapse, more likely to reoffend. It offers them that support mechanism to see what good behavior is, to discuss it, to road test ideas, and then to model it with a group of different people. The other thing that circles have also done, not only Circles Southwest, but other different circles projects across the country have also got involved in working with men who've downloaded and viewed child sexual abuse imagery. And to me, what we've started to say is the emergence of what they're calling through the gate circles, which I think is the purest form of circle, which is where the circle starts in the prison and transitions through the gate with the core member. And I think that that's what circles really should and need to be. It's about those points of transition. Now, if someone who's been in the community for 2 years gets a circle, that's a good thing and that's a positive thing. But it's those people who are transitioning out of the prison system and back into the community that really need that level of degree and support, because that is one of the hardest things that they will do, especially if they've been in prison for a longer period of time.
Yeah, definitely. And they haven't got family or friends to support them because, as you say, the nature of that type of offence often means they haven't got that.
Definitely.
As we draw the interview to a close then, we've taken a minute to kind of scan the horizon of your future. What's in store?
So, as Jerry said, we've got a book coming out hopefully early next year on epi-crim approaches to the prevention of to sexual abuse. I'm just finishing up work on another EPAC international project, which has been looking at secondary prevention by law enforcement organisations. So, should police be involved with working with people at risk of committing sexual abuse, and what should that look like? Because it seems counterintuitive to traditional policing, but actually policing has shifted significantly, even over our lifestyle. You know, the police force that we see today, so like, for instance, we train even in Somerset Police at the university. The police that we see today was nothing like the police I grew up with 20 or 30 years ago. And then we've also got a number of projects that we're finishing up. One on trauma-informed practice with men convicted of a sexual offence. We're involved in some employability research around sexual offending and integration, as well as broader trauma-informed practice work and self-care within the criminal justice system. And we've got a number of sibling sexual abuse projects that are ongoing at the minute, and a couple of bids under review. So I suppose the answer is busy. But I do think that, you know, I'd rather be busy than not is probably a bit of a trite answer, but it's probably true.
I couldn't imagine you sitting in an office waiting for a story to happen, Kieran.
No,
You'd
no.
be doing something to create a story rather than sitting there waiting for something to happen.
But yeah, I think that, you know, we've been presented with a number of interesting issues around criminal justice and sexual violence. We have a CPS that has been told to prosecute more people. We've got a prison system that is maybe buckling under the volume of inmates that it's got at the minute. We've got an increase in policing across the board, but not an increase in probation or an increase in prisons. We've got new ideas fermenting about actually violence reduction units, the role of public health approaches in criminal justice, and actually the ways in which we need to think about crime and deviance. So there's a lot of opportunities at the minute, and being at a point of transition from one government to a different government, we don't really know what these opportunities will look like for the foreseeable future. So, like, what I would say for anyone sort of involved in forensic psychology or criminology or criminal justice, the landscape will shift in the next 3 to 4 years. But I think it's as much up to us to have those conversations and to sort of push back with ideas of our own and to say this is maybe some ideas about how this could shift, because I think we've got a bit of a broader palette now than we may have had previously.
And I think what you also really epitomise is the global working. I mean, the work you do with ATSA is amazing. Obviously, they're based in Canada and America. You know, like you said, the European grants you've done. It seems to really have opened up into working across the nations rather than just thinking of our own little part of the world.
And I think that's why prevention matters. I think prevention matters because it opens up the conversation and says, what can we do to stop this? How can we learn from each other rather than this has happened? What can we do to fix it for these two individual people? I think we'll always need to do that. You will never completely eradicate sexual abuse or sexual violence. It's been with us from year dot. And it's all over the world. It's not a Western problem. It's not a 20th century problem. But the more that we engage in the conversation, the more we see good practice, the more that we hear positive stories, the more that we get ideas for things that we can try and say, maybe this could work in the UK, maybe this might not work in the UK, but let's have a conversation about it and see where it takes us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No problems. Thank you for having me.
So it just remains for us to say, let's talk forensic psychology.